Welcome to Ignorant the Podcast, and everybody else, welcome back. This podcast is about me inviting people on the show to make my listeners and I less ignorant to who they are, what they do, how they do it, why they do it, what it takes to do it, yeah. And with that being said, today I have my friend Natalie as a co-host. You want to introduce yourself?
Hi, my name is Natalie. I'm a PhD student at Syracuse University. Does a lot of nerdy shit around borders and political mourning and activism.
Yeah. Juan, you want to introduce yourself?
So my name is Juan Gonzalez, born in Mexico, raised in Southwest Detroit, and currently in law school, unfortunately, and have about a year left. So
Nice. So we're here interviewing Juan about, because I've always been kind of ignorant to immigration and been very sheltered to that compared to some of my friends and family. Well, not so much family, but some of my friends who have had to worry about being undocumented and stuff like that. So that's why I wanted to talk about that kind of stuff. So what got you? You said, I know you started as an activist first. So like, what made you go into, I guess, fighting for this cause?
well, I mean, the beginning was that I grew up undocumented, so it was a
Yeah.
very close experience. My parents were undocumented. I still am myself. Luckily, my parents have been able to adjust. So it started that way. Like, what limitations did that, put on me, my family, my community? So I always ask myself, like, why? Why do we have these limitations to begin with?
Yeah.
And it just started me on this journey that brought me to where I am today, in law school, because I wanted to help people. That was the goal. So
Yeah.
it's got me to where I am today. I just kept asking myself, why? So
Yeah.
I want to thank Natalie, too, for getting me involved in activism. She's the one that taught me the ropes. So
Yeah.
I don't know about that. I just kind of went in there and was like, all right, we might get arrested.
So where did you guys start?
I think when DACA during the Trump administration came under attack, we started organizing a lot around that. But as Juan can also speak to, like, DACA was kind of just a dog bone, a temporary protection. And so a lot of our efforts were geared towards permanent protection or stuff that kind of expanded, with DACA, with a lot of economic conversations, they narrowed the window of who's an acceptable immigrant. So when we organized, we were trying, even if it was for DACA or license, making sure it was expanded to everybody towards permanent protection, not just in terms of immigration, but even on the legal side and also abolition. So.
yeah, because, I mean, at the end of the day, what DACA is just a work permit. It's just telling the government, hey, I'm here. I don't have any kind of legal immigration status. And the government says, okay, we know you're here. Here's this work permit. But we don't have any kind of status, any kind of relief. I could still be deported right after we finish this podcast.
Yeah.
So that's, I think, an important distinction, And one thing that I think is we always stress was the fact that we hate, like, the dreamer narrative.
Yeah.
Because that throws under the bus my parents, a lot of, adults who made the journey and maybe brought, children, their kids, nieces and nephews, that kind of stuff. And it's unfair because at the end of the day, they made a very hard decision to want to provide for their kids. That shouldn't be penalized by anyone. So.
Right. And it wasn't your dream to tentatively come all the way out here first, Yeah, that's interesting. So, what is the difference between a green card and DACA then? Like, what is that?
So a green card is technically like you're a legal permanent resident, right?
Okay.
But there's also like different layers of like type of immigrant status where you get like a work permit to be like an agricultural worker, specialized technical worker, like some kind of engineer. Sometimes athletes get like obviously special kinds of visas to be able to play any kind of sport. So there's like a long laundry list of kinds of visas you can have. But yeah, green card is technically you're a legal permanent resident. You wait a couple years and you become a citizen.
Yeah, there's a pathway to citizenship attached to green cards where there is not with DACA temporary protective statuses or like a regular work visa.
Okay.
Does not mean that there's necessarily a pathway to citizenship.
Yeah.
And that was like a lot of post-DACA immigration organizing was broadening that pathway to citizenship. That's a lot of what Biden promised.
So DACA was like the work permit, but it wasn't really protection from being deported.
Not really. It was just a work permit. That's all it was. So.
And if you got into, we had a friend who got into some legal trouble.
Yeah.
I think it was maybe they found, it was right before marijuana was illegal. I don't remember exactly what it was. but they were deported because of that. So it's not even like a protection. It was something that you or I could have gotten just as easily in trouble for.
Yeah.
But yeah, and it's like, why do we punish immigration or immigrants so much when there's somebody who's a citizen can do that very same thing and not lose their life or be deported? So DACA doesn't protect you from kind of those, like what a citizen could break the law every day in those ways are deportable offenses, even if you have DACA.
Yeah, it's very arbitrary. I mean, I have a bunch of classmates that show off their like MIPs, their minor in possessions, and they're just like, oh yeah, I got like 3 of them, and they're just like, it's whatever to them. But if I were to get one, that's, yeah,
that's crazy.
Not anymore. I'm 30 now almost, so it doesn't. I can't get those anymore. But yeah, if I would have got one as a kid, I wouldn't have been able to even get DACA. So.
And you said that crossing the border is only a civil offense, right? Is that what you're saying? So when you get deported, does that make that? Is it still just a civil offense, or how does that?
Yeah.
What does that go under the law when you get deported? What happens?
I mean, it just goes on your record as you have. Think of it like as a strike, and then if they catch you a second time, they can actually put you in jail for. Or is it the third time? It serves as strikes, but at one point, if they catch you crossing the border enough times, they can arrest you and put you in, federal prison for a couple of years. But that takes, and a lot of times because like the court system's always so backed up, that they'll just deport you. But they do have, like after a certain amount of like civil infractions, same with like if you get enough parking tickets or maybe not parking, but like speeding tickets, they're like, okay, this is too many, like you're wilding. But yeah, civil infraction for immigration kind of works in a similar way where if you get enough deportations, they will be able to put you in prison. So. Not to mention detention. There are people that are detained sometimes for months, and they have no court hearing. They have nothing going on. They're just sitting in what's functionally a federal prison detention center for months at a time. So.
Yeah. So I was kind of wondering how that works too. It's like, what happens if you get deported today? Someone gets deported today. Like, are they in Mexico tomorrow, or are they just?
It's
a long process.
Are they technically in jail until they're back over there? Or like?
They're in Dearborn. Dearborn has they'll be in detention, which is at least in Michigan, there's a lot of jails that are double as detention centers. Yeah. And then Dearborn is a temporary place. And so for a while, there's not Dearborn itself, but the jail there. Yeah. That's where they would hold a lot of folks on their way to deporting them. So if you saw their name or number disappear from where they were detained, it was like a good note that they're on their way to being deported and they might be at Dearborn. Kind of there. But yeah, like usually you're detained until deportation, especially if it's like something you're fighting. And then it does make certain legal ways of coming back much harder. So some folks, like if you can, and even work with their lawyer where they leave voluntarily so they don't have the deportation record. We had a few cases where like, they'd get picked up, they'd be released by ICE, but before they'd enter deportation stuff, they'd like voluntarily leave.
Departure, yeah.
Voluntary departure, yeah. And that's a way of kind of avoiding that on your record.
Yeah. I mean, it gets very technical. It gets very minute, very arbitrary, because think of it like as a road map, but there's a shit ton of forks in the road where like if you take the wrong turn, that's it. You can't adjust status, or you might get like a bar placed on you where you can't come in the United States for 10 years. And there's also a permanent bar.
That's what I thought happened every time or something like that. That once you get caught, you can't come back for a while or something.
Yeah. So
is that the average punishment, or is it just?
Yeah, it's usually the 10-year one, because it's so the first bar is only 180 days, but you have to have been here undocumented for like I think 90 days. So that's just 3 months. Most people clear the 3 months, pretty quickly here. And so once you're caught after you're here undocumented for 90 days, you get hit with the 10-year bar. So you're barred
after
for
90 days?
After the 90 days. So if you're here undocumented for more than 90 days, you get hit with a 10-year bar. It's a long time.
But if it's less than 90 days, then it's only...
Yeah, the second time around, I think is there a 20-year one?
I don't know about the 20-year, but I was going to say there's also other ways of triggering the bar. Like, remember we had the case where she went back, and if she just like that and came back, so even being here, she had already triggered the 10-year bar if it was found out. So, there's just like a lot of, they use that. And then I think the 20-year is if you come back on the 10-year, but essentially like that's been triggered, and you can apply for different reliefs to kind of avoid that, but it is something that they're quick to hand out.
Okay.
They do their best to deport people here, man. They
Right.
do their damnedest to make sure we deport people here.
How do people get into schools and stuff like that? I always wondered that.
So there was a Supreme Court case back in 1970 something. I'm not good with dates, but there was a Supreme Court case out of Texas, Plyler v. Doe, where they wanted to exclude undocumented children from going to public schools here in the U.S. because they receive some kind of federal funding and some state funding. And so they were like, we don't want to teach these, Mexican kids in Texas, so we're going to exclude the children of immigrants.
Yeah.
And so it went all the way to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court said, while these children may not be, American citizens, they might become one day, and it's in the best interest of this nation to teach them how to read and write. Now, I would have argued it's in the best interest of, these are kids, man. Teach them to read and write.
Yeah.
And with the current court, I mean, who knows what they might do? What if they do rule a case that, okay, we'll leave it up to the states if they want to teach undocumented children? So we might have a scenario where some states might be like, yeah, we'll take undocumented children in our public schools. You could have some states that are like, we're just not going to teach these kids. Not going to teach them how to read and write. So
Do they report them, or is there cases of that where schools are reporting to the city or whatever that there's undocumented students in this area? Or
I don't know off the top of my head, but I mean, I wouldn't be surprised if that happened somewhere in this country, man. It's a big place. A lot of people out here that generally just don't want immigrants here. So
yeah.
It's pretty scary out here.
And I think it also works the other way around, where I know ICE has done raids at schools, especially during the last administration, that was kind of a thing. But so Detroit is technically a sanctuary city. Syracuse is technically a sanctuary city, which is, everything from hospitals to schools to the police are not supposed to be working with ICE. Yeah. So I think it's less of an issue with schools just because of the nature of schools, not so much reporting it, but there's a lot of issues that could happen at the school that could flag or have those consequences if they're not addressed properly. So, a lot of folks don't have access to licenses. Here in Detroit, we have the municipal IDs. I don't know where that is right now, but imagine not being able to, enroll your own children in this. That could flag something later on. Or, CPS, the way that child protective services are handled, could trigger a deportation. There's been a lot of cases where we've had to go and talk to child protective services, being undocumented isn't, a different an issue that you have to deal with. Yeah. No. So that could trigger it. But I think the biggest issue comes out of hospitals and police. Because there has been a lot of hospital cases where, they ask for your social security number. They do this, and they have, in the same way they might call police about a gunshot. Somebody, and they're not supposed to. And then especially the police, city council has passed this, that the police are not supposed to work with ICE. And I get calls, sometimes once a week of, can you help us pick up somebody who was arrested for not having a driver's license? And they're not in a lot of trouble. You just have to bail them out. But as soon as they're in the system, ICE can look up on that, and then they go in. They also hang out in courtrooms to kind of pick people up. So schools aren't it, but it does, I don't think schools are inherently working with ICE, but all of those things can that's a place that they can get picked up.
It just creates another option, for immigration to be weaponized against immigrant communities. So, and that's what it means to or this is how what causes different people and communities to live in the shadows functionally, where you have to avoid certain spaces. You have to be very careful when you're out and about, always very vigilant, because it could happen at any moment.
Yeah, I lived in Arizona one time with Sheriff Joe Pyro was around, and they passed a few laws that were one of them was they had the right to ask anybody for an ID at any point. That didn't last long, but I remember they passed that law, and it was huge.
He was a monster, man.
Yeah.
And thanks to the activists that fought against him, because he was, my God, he was a real wild. So
I know a lot of people, because I worked construction. Construction, there's a lot of people that have been in jail in that trade, because it's the only place you can be a felon and still get a really good job, But man, a lot of them, you can just tell that when they go to Tent City, where they have to wear all pink, and their prison is a tent their jail is a tent instead of an actual prison or jail,
Yeah.
That was interesting to hear all their stories about that, you know, and how he would just degrade them and stuff like that. But she said you've done some work by the border, or did you want to say something about that?
Well, I just wanted to build off what you were saying about Arizona because that's part of the stop and frisk law. That happened SB, what was it, 140?
1070.
1070, yeah.
Yeah, I remember that.
And that's an important thing to look at immigration because when we were saying about schools, like maybe a state could decide undocumented children couldn't go into the school. That bill is part of that same kind of strategy. So that came out of ALEC, which is a far-right conservative legal think tank, that if they can't pass something at the national level, they reproduce it across the country at the state level. And Arizona has been where a lot of those laws have kind of come. So that stop and frisk, like then that got picked up in different places and used to kind of change the setting. But I mean, that has a lot to do just to come back to being at the border too. And how different, like, you can use that narrative of, like, we're under threat of folks coming over to cause that legislation to be possible there. But then it was picked up in, like, New Hampshire and places, you know. So it's like their window of opportunity to create more inhumane and borders across the country, even if they can't do it at the federal level.
Yeah. And, so back to about the border. What was your experience?
Yeah, I went down to Texas earlier in the year. Currently, there's a program called Migrant Protection Protocols. Trump put it into effect, and Biden pretty much left it there. He did not touch it. Tried to, and then he's like, "Oh, the court stopped me. You can still try again," you know. Yeah. But anyway, so this program pretty much requires migrants coming here to ask for asylum to wait in Mexico while their application gets processed. But if you are in Mexico in a refugee camp, you're going to have access to limited resources to be able to fill out an asylum application, which is not an easy application to fill out. Yeah. And it's by design. It's so that people aren't even able to complete it, and when they are, they're missing documents. They filled it out incorrectly. It's created in a way so that we can deport as many people as possible. So when I went down there, I was able to meet a group of people who had already been in Mexico for a month, and when they had their hearing before the immigration judge, she asked them, "Where is your application?" And they look at her like, "We've been in a refugee camp. How do we prepare an asylum application?" Yeah. And she berates these people as if it's their fault that these immigration laws are just so complex. Yeah. And the fact that they're sending them down to a place where they're not going to be able to have access to legal resources, to the documentation that's required. And it's inhumane the way they treat these people. So,
yeah. Do you know anything about blockchain technology, or are you into that at all?
Blockchain?
Yeah, like kind of like crypto and all that stuff, but mostly just the blockchain technology.
As it pertains to immigration, or in general?
Yeah. How it can pertain to immigration.
Not really.
Yeah,
not really. I don't think it has any application in terms of like. To help. No, not really. I mean, maybe decentralized ways to move funds around, potentially, but as it currently exists, I don't, not right now at least.
Yeah, I'm curious if that is being talked about through lawyers and stuff, because like according to the blockchain technology, I guess I'm not an expert on blockchain technology or anything, but from what I have read about it, is that everything is documented and stays that way, and it's untouchable. Once it's put on the blockchain, then it's there forever, you know? So, like, basically you can put the passports on there, you can make identifications on there and truly decentralized identification, you know? And I was only asking just because I was curious if, like, a lot of lawyers are getting into that, or if there's any laws that are, where they're going to be trying to implement that. Because really, like, anybody who like has nothing could still have identification on the blockchain.
Yeah,
you know?
I mean, it's interesting because a lot of immigrant communities have they send back home what are called reparations. So it's just money going back home to your families, and this is like a major source of income for a lot of people in other nations, because it's people who've made it to the U.S. are working, and they'll send money back to their family members. And a lot of times, the ways that people send money are they're taxed. They're charged by like a private party, a company, think Western Union, MoneyGram, that kind of stuff. They charge you to send money back, so that can obviously cuts into the money that could be used for the family back home and wherever where they're sending money to.
Yeah, I read before this podcast that's a $4 billion market, just the fees of sending money over there, and it could be like $100, $150 just to accept money in a place like Syria. You know, that would be the fee. You know,
so that's where I could envision it being applied to that use. And as far as I know, there have been some groups that have been able to use that maybe to move money to like Palestine and that kind of stuff, which is awesome. But that's far and few in between. A lot of the blockchain stuff, to me, I'm not getting into it because I don't know as much. But it seems more like the rich people's playground where they can mess around with.
Right now I
that market.
See that. Yeah, but as far as that technology, I'm curious if that can. Just the documentation side of it, of everything, like proof of sales of things, and then like the proof of you can really document every last piece. You can keep their criminal history on there. You can keep their or lack thereof, their credit on there.
Yeah.
Because especially in poor places, there is no credit except for, I'll give you my credit, friend to friend or family members, But yeah, I was just curious. We don't have to get too deep into that because technically I don't know much about that either. So I don't invest too much time into that. But another thing I was just curious about is, Republicans are so scared to open the border and stuff. But part of me feels like that if we open the border, we could help our economy. I feel like it'd actually benefit our economy instead of destroy it, because right now nobody wants to work, and a lot of people come to this country to make money. And I feel like, I guess my question is, do you think that would be true if we opened the border, that it could actually help the economy versus the way that Republicans make it seem like it would destroy the economy?
Yeah, I mean, it's been shown, there's study after study of that whenever you let people in, jobs are created because these people are coming to survive. They're coming to make a living, to eat, and, earn a roof over their heads. So we put it in those purely economic terms. It's been proven that when you allow more immigrants to come in, economies are strengthened. So they create just markets in and of themselves, like little communities where they have to sustain themselves. I mean, we see it here locally in Southwest Detroit. I mean, how many restaurants and markets and stores do we see opening up all the time? Because it's just a self-sustained economy of everyone supporting each other. So it's been proven time and time again that if you let people in, the economy will improve.
Yeah.
Now I like to detach that from the fact that people should have the liberty to be able to move wherever they feel free and safe, wherever they want to move functionally. So that's the way I always see it. Because when we put it down in economic terms, we're talking about how much can you provide for me type of thing. Can you earn me $1 and then I'll let you in? And if you can, what if someone can't work for whatever reason? Are we just gonna be oh no, you're not gonna be useful to me? And I say me in a colloquial sense of the U.S. That's why it's not that I don't like that. Well, I don't like that framing of can you provide me $1 and then I'll let you in. So
yeah. No, I respect that for sure. I like that you said it like that.
And I just wanted to add, I think too, it depends, when we're talking about the economy and the function, how borders function, because they're not necessarily to keep people out or to control the passings of goods and peoples across the border. That is an economy in and of itself.
Yeah.
So the U.S. economy runs on for-profit prisons. It runs on being able to use exploitive labor. So when the question is, would it be good or bad for the economy? Well, right now the border is, in terms of making profit.
Yeah, it makes money.
Makes money. The way that, what I said earlier about a lot of jails holding immigrants, that's a way that we're filling beds in for-profit prisons, that someone's making the money. But the border's function essentially is this politics of exclusion. Because even if you make it past the border, in a way that border still follows you in kind of the borders that you face in your day-to-day life of what you have access to.
Mm-hmm.
So it also says in what ways you can participate in the economy. If the U.S. didn't want to let anybody in, they could, the U.S. wants people to come in undocumented. So there is this exploited labor force. The same way that you can get out of, incarceration and you are only allotted a certain labor force that you can work in.
Yeah.
So they're in many ways keeping a class of exploitive labor that they can pull from. Opening up the borders would, it depends. Does this come with documentation? Because opening up the borders could not necessarily change the way that immigrants are criminalized or the ways that undocumented folks can only work in certain places and in certain ways.
Okay.
So I guess like that was just something I wanted, because the border isn't, it's not just a matter of opening up the border, but I think like even with what you're doing with law, beyond just immigration, but into, opening up the border, what else would we have to do, to kind of relieve the legal barriers that folks face?
It's also kind of, I guess, ironic that functionally for Americans who have an American passport, they do have an open border to most of the globe. They can go wherever the hell they want, right? But when people want to come here, it's like, oh, no, doors are closed.
Yeah.
So I think it's a bit hypocritical that Americans the nation, get to tell other people who can come here and who can't. Meanwhile, they have the liberty to travel wherever they see fit. So.
Yeah, that's true. We can go anywhere. So what's your goal with law after you graduate?
I feel like every semester I have a whole different topic that I'm into.
Yeah.
At first it was like civil rights law and litigation, and then it became criminal defense, so some type of public defender. And then I've always been interested in immigration the entire time as well. As of recent, I've become interested in like labor law and union activity, that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
But every semester I'll take classes tailored to that, specific area of law and field, and I'll, read a book or two about it in my off time. And I just get so demoralized about the state of the law itself. Like, how can I use the tools of specifically the legal profession to help people dealing with those issues? And they're just not built to help, my people, my community. So it frustrates me. Doesn't mean I won't do it. As long as I graduate next year, I will be working in one of those fields to try to help my people. But a piece of that, and I would prefer it to be a major piece, has to be organizing the community around these issues, so that if we can't lobby to change these things themselves, we can at least help each other so we can survive functionally and thrive, hopefully, ideally.
So where does law come into that? Because a lot of times you'll hear lawyers say, like, law doesn't necessarily change the system, but we can use law to protect someone. And you just brought up organizing. Maybe you could speak a little bit to movement lawyering, or how, like, law doesn't just have to be reactionary or protective, but what ways could we use it to kind of change stuff in a
If you find out, let me know. No, I'm kidding. I mean, there has to be a way. There's ways you can find the little wins, right? Where you mentioned earlier, we help people from with their immigration case, where they're able to stay here and stay with their family. So those are the little wins where you can use the law to help people. Specifically, like in the terms of criminal defense, you can save someone, or not save someone, quote unquote, but you can help someone with their case and their defense. If they go to trial. In labor law, you can help someone win their wages back whenever they've been robbed by exploitative employer. That kind of stuff, the classic stuff. But it's very hard just because of the resources that we're up against. Because in a lot of these cases, we're up against either the state or a company or an employer that has, vast amount of resources. So the law itself, that's how it could be used to help. But it's the fact that it's tailored to help power. So the state and people that are wealthy and have power already to begin with. It's not tailored to help, quote unquote, the little guy. So. Yeah. That's where it gets complicated. That's why sometimes I'm a little demoralized at the state of the law, but we gotta keep fighting. I've learned from, I believe it's Audre Lorde, hope is a discipline, and we have to train and practice it. So
that's interesting. And then, what's this group you were speaking about? The abolition lawyer group.
Oh, on campus. We started like a police abolition group on campus. I've heard of very few from other law schools. It's basically, there are groups on campus that are, pro criminal defense, but sometimes they might get prosecutors that come out of that. Like, I'll just work for the other side, and it's, it's not looked upon as some kind of, you're kind of betraying the ideals of criminal defense, of helping people. So we created a group that's explicitly abolition. So our goal is to eliminate prisons. Obviously, that's a utopian goal, but that's what we should be striving for, right? Yeah. And it's addressing the underlying conditions that lead to some kind of harm or quote unquote crime, right? It's the issues of poverty, of subpar schools, of pollution, of mass incarceration where we've jailed generations of people. For example, marijuana that is now legal in a lot of states. Yeah, there's a lot of people in prison because of
Still,
that. So
yeah.
abolitionists realize that, see the whole picture, instead of, oh, you assaulted someone for this, when it's like, yeah, well, they're trying to feed their family and they're going to do it one way or another. So it's seeing the entire picture and realizing that the harm was elsewhere as well. The harm was the fact that they've defunded our neighborhoods and our communities. So that's what that group was on campus. And hopefully we can grow it this year. So
So now that you brought up the prison thing, this is kind of just going to be open subject, I guess, but what if you could reform the prison system, how would you do that?
I mean, I'd get rid of it.
All of it?
I'd get rid of it. And that comes, like, as I mentioned, hand in hand with funding communities, with funding everything from schools themselves, community centers, all kinds of extracurricular activities. There's a lot that has to go involved hand in hand with that, It's providing people what they need to survive, to live, to thrive. It's food, housing, healthcare. It's all these things connected that a person needs to fulfill their basic needs, at least.
Yeah.
And then on top of that, I believe that we need a community. We need some solidarity. We need love. I think that's important as well.
Yeah.
So, but if you're hungry, you're focusing on that.
A lot of those things can prevent somebody from ending up into prison for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, I could see that. But yeah, I always kind of just thought if they would still be there to just. Well, I feel like there should never be more than like a couple years sentences. Like if anything, like a little bit of time in peace alone. But I feel like everybody in there should be make them as educated as you can, and like give them as many resources as you can, give them therapy, give them whatever while they're in there. But right now it doesn't seem like they can get whatever their money buys them, even drugs or whatever, phones, whatever. But
I mean, as an abolitionist, like even talking about reform, like makes you get like uneasy. But if we're talking about reform, maybe like some kind of is a Scandinavian model where it's focused on rehabilitation, and you just mentioned some of those things that we could do.
Yeah.
Because as it currently stands, it's to punish, it's to brutalize people as much as we can. It's like you learn your damn lesson.
Punish and degrade and
exactly
belittle,
Exactly, and it doesn't help anybody.
It makes them worse. Like they come out of the system and they don't know what to do. And you can't blame them.
Right.
Same thing. That's kind of like any system you go into. People come out of the military and they don't know what to do with their life either because they were told what to do for 4 to 8 years straight.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, it's to make a profit, not just punish. The 13th Amendment, like, made it so prisons were a source of free labor.
Yeah.
So I think like it's hard to reform prisons and like even talk about reforming it because one, it came out of slave patrols. So there's not, like, when that's the foundation, there's not much you can reform something towards.
Yeah.
Two, because it's profitized. If at the end of the day, like, the goal is how much profit a prison can make, how much money it can save tax dollars, not necessarily rehabilitation.
Yeah. Now that we brought up the military, can an undocumented person join the military, right?
I mean, technically.
Like,
I mean, there's been cases of people who have served and then, they get caught for some kind of offense. Sometimes I think I've heard a story of someone who got caught with marijuana and that caused them to be deported, yet they are, a veteran of the U.S. military, right? So they can technically serve. I believe in people with DACA. In my case, I looked into it at one point. Like, I wonder if I can. And it's like if you meet a certain like requirements, because sometimes they have like language requirements. They need people who can translate. And so like very specialized languages, like Mandarin, for example. And if you're a nurse, I believe you can serve with DACA. But I mean, remember when I was in high school, I asked a Marine recruiter, hey, can I serve? And I told him my situation. Oh, I'm undocumented. He's like, you don't want to do that, brother. Like, because if you still have no pathway to adjust, it doesn't matter if you serve. Like, they don't give a shit. It will do if you serve and you have a pathway. It'll speed up your process. It will do that.
Yeah.
They'll put you, think of it, to the front of the line. They'll review your application first. But if you still have no functional pathway to citizenship, if you're not on that roadmap and you have a pathway to get there, you served pretty much for nothing. You served the empire for nothing. So
yeah, that's crazy. You could serve the country and they wouldn't even try to prioritize you being a citizen.
I
or
mean,
making you become a citizen.
yeah. Now that we're talking
yeah.
about like military veterans and whatnot, they don't treat their own military veterans.
Yeah,
How many of
sure.
them come out with PTSD and whatnot?
Yeah.
You know, I have a buddy who's a former Marine at this point. He's done his deployment and all that. And I talk to him all the time, and he'll get like upset sometimes, and I'm just like, I'm not the one who did this, man. Like, this is your country who did this to veterans. Of like, they send them to unjust and illegal wars, and then they commit potential war crimes. They do all kinds of heinous acts over there, and they come back and they're traumatized and hearing terrors in the night, and then they end up, for example, sometimes houseless and struggling, addicted. And country functioning doesn't care about them, right? So imagine someone who's undocumented. They're gonna be like, less much so, we'll just get rid of you, we'll deport you. So it's brutal.
That's crazy. And I was curious, like, how does the marriage thing work when people get married to?
So what that provides, think again of the roadmap. It opens up one of those roads where you're able to adjust at that point.
Yeah.
Now, depending on the specifics of your situation. Like, let's say, for example, you're a DACA recipient. In my situation, you did advanced parole, you left and came back. Now your last entry was legal. Now all you have to do is get a petition from your spouse, and you can adjust. Boom. But if your last entry wasn't legal, you have to go and ask for like forgiveness. You have to go to an embassy in Mexico, and it's a whole process. It's a whole technical process. But that opens up one of those roads on that roadmap to adjust your status. So, and it is a common one that a lot of people use.
Yeah, and but then some people talk about the punishment to that, right? If you get, like, there's a punishment to this if the country or the government finds out that you did that or did that.
I mean, I'm loving like this roadmap analogy, because think of it like if there's something in your file, that you submit, or something that they have on their files. Think of it as a roadblock where they're like, oh nope, you don't meet this, or you did that, so now you can adjust, and now you might be potentially deported. It just depends. Every case is different.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, it's still a very scary process, because you're
citizens'
risking at the end of the day.
Do you know what the citizens' consequences? The person that's already documented marrying, like say if I like every 7 years or whatever married a new person just to help them out or whatever, isn't there a punishment for that or something like that? Or like,
I just want to. This is not legal advice.
Yeah. No,
Since I'm not an attorney or anything yet, but yeah, I mean, yeah, you can get in trouble for doing like marriage fraud. For that kind of stuff.
Okay, that's what.
But not for
Marriage
marrying someone who
That's what I was like, what is the law? What do you get in trouble for?
Yeah,
Like
no,
fraud.
that's like a felony. It's pretty serious stuff. So no one's ever done that. That's never happened.
Yeah,
This is not legal advice once again.
But I was just curious because people always make jokes about stuff like that for sure.
Yeah.
But especially in this neighborhood. But I was just curious about that.
And
Yeah.
It's always talked about.
I think that's often suggested. Like, we've done a lot of events where like we either talked or went through like simulations of different immigration statuses, and a lot of people be like, okay, we'll just get married.
Yeah, that's what I mean. Like, it's just like, oh,
Yeah.
You're like, why don't you marry my wife? I'll marry your wife. Whatever.
But
like
so-
people, I hear that all the time, literally all the time.
Yeah.
And
In a
that's
joking way, a lot of times.
As a
yeah,
joke, in a video
joking,
game.
and then it's also like accused a lot of times, like,
Yeah.
oh, they're just gonna marry someone for papers type of thing. And I think like one thing to point out is like, even if marriage opens up a pathway, there's a lot of like, so if you have DACA or you're undocumented and you applied for what Juan mentioned was advanced parole,
Yeah.
that allows you to return to Mexico, come back, and have that last entry point be quote and unquote legal. But
Yeah.
I don't think any of this is legal or illegal. If you don't have that option of advanced parole, you are also opening up yourself to other risks by trying, like what you said about asking for permission. That requires you to leave. You may not be able to come back.
Mm-hmm.
So this is a lot. There's a lot of extra stress and, these barriers and roadblocks that couples go through,
Yeah.
especially the person whose status is kind of up at the top.
A divorce can also still mess up your process, right?
Technically,
Like, if it was
depends. Like time frames.
Yeah.
It can, but I mean, relationships themselves. Let's say it's an actual marriage, people love each other,
Yeah,
and
sure.
they're trying to adjust that or whatnot. But But that tension's always gonna be there of like, well, is this happening because this person wants papers? And that's pretty fucked up, you know, that people have to live through that kind of stress.
Shouldn't be no
of being accused of like, oh, you're doing this because you want papers. And it's like relationships are as hard as they are by themselves, you know. You gotta add this added stress of, you know, the U.S. government might want to deport me one day, and that's why you're getting in this relationship. And that's, to me, that's inhumane, you know. That's adding an added stress that shouldn't exist, to be honest. But
I agree 100%. All these things are inhumane, but now you just got to figure out how the way to just make it work.
Yeah.
You know, and that's it. Yeah, that's why you said, like, illegal, or, you know, it shouldn't be illegal. Nothing should be illegal. A person shouldn't be illegal. Yeah. Doesn't make sense. You know?
Even grammatically, but this is part of, like, that crisis at the border, right? Yeah. So by criminalizing immigration or using this, like, illegal, legal person terminology, they're able to diffuse a lot of the violence that happens, whether it's actual physical violence or even just the violence of, you know, what being in a relationship and having to always kind of have that tension.
Yeah.
So it's like criminalizing bodies before they even cross the border.
Yeah.
We fight back where we can, though, right?
Right. That's all you can do. That's all you can do is fight back.
And so with that, I think one thing that, you know, you and I have talked a lot about, and maybe you could speak to this more, is like since a lot of immigration has recently been decided in the Supreme Court, and we don't have the avenue to push back with the Supreme Court the way we do with Congress. Congress, you can call your representative. You can't so much. So I wondered if you could speak a little bit maybe about how to push back when things are in the Supreme Court, especially now that we see Roe versus Wade and folks protesting outside of the Supreme Court getting, quote and unquote, arrested, where that's not where they can necessarily push back. Where do you see ways of kind of pushing back when so much is tied to the Supreme Court and that's appointed? We don't have the pull.
I mean, first and foremost, helping each other. I think that's step one. You got to help the families, help the people that are actually involved in this. I mean, for example, when my uncle got detained, I just knew my aunt was, because he's the breadwinner, you know, he's the one working and all that. So I tried to raise a couple bucks and, you know, sauce it her way because she still has a mouth to feed. She had my cousins that she had to take care of. So, you know, family got together and whatever we could do to help y'all. So I think that's step one. That's how support each other. Yeah. Step two is, I think, protesting wherever we can is actually, you know, making these people nervous, because they should feel a little nervous of what they're doing, the violence that they're inflicting on our people, you know. So I think it's very important. Besides that, I mean, any ideas, I'd be willing to accept them, but I think those two are crucial.
Well, and you
I'm not gonna tell people to go and vote though, because they can do what you want with that. But
no, and what you said with mutual aid, I think, you know, that's kind of what you were speaking about with your aunt, and that may be a way that what you were speaking about with blockchain, not just being documentation, but you know, kind of supporting each other, having that mutual aid and buying out of these systems. Because while we may not economically be connected to the Supreme Court, a lot of the border technology, the police, like, we support them every day with our money.
Yeah, exactly. We fund it every day.
Yeah, so I don't know if you have, like, is there kind of a holistic look at that with mutual aid and then kind of how we can buy out of funding these systems that are our own oppression?
Yeah, for sure. So, I mean, on that first point, I think mutual aid is a tie into that, where, like, we raise funds constantly and always, and we have, like, a general fund where we're able to tap into whenever it's necessary of, this person was, you know, the breadwinner was deported and now the family's still here. Help them in whatever way we can, you know, provide for them. And we use mutual aid and each other as a community to be able to do that. We, you know, help each other thrive as much as we, or, you know, survive as much as we can in those instances. And then organizing, you know, it's educating each other so we're able to push back wherever we can, whenever we're in our respective spaces. And someone says something dumb, you correct people, you know, as much as we can. So I think education, organization, all that is going to be crucial. And I'm not just throwing out buzz terms. I genuinely mean, like, just having these discussions, you know, of talking about this, because sometimes we just don't know what's even happening. I mean, my family personally lived through these situations of being undocumented, and my siblings, you know, didn't know, because we're taught to keep quiet about that kind of stuff, because we don't know who's listening or who's around us that might want to do some kind of harm of, like, oh, now I know this person's undocumented. If they ever, like, you know, if I ever want to do them wrong, I'm going to just call immigration on them. So we're taught to not even talk about it. So that's why we start from a place of not knowing, what it means to be undocumented, what it means to have DACA. So just having these conversations, I think, is crucial. So I'm the kind of person at a party that's like a buzzkill, because I'm like, if someone asks a question about that, I'm going to talk about this shit for like an hour. And they're going to be like, all right, Juan, get off it. Let's talk about something else. Let's go, chill. And I'm like, no, you started it. Now we're going to talk about it. We're going to learn. So
no, that's why I started a podcast, because like I love asking questions. But like also, I feel like there's a time and a place to ask these questions, But since I have a podcast, I get to, I get to ask all these questions. But that's why it's called ignorant, because sometimes I know that I'm so ignorant to a lot of these things, and I also know a lot of average Americans are,
We all are, man.
So.
I mean, I was mentioning earlier that there was a professor of immigration law and the dean of a university in Oklahoma that came to my law school to speak on immigration, and he was just lying. Either he just didn't know, so either he was ignorant, or he was ignorant to the fact that like, oh, no one's gonna correct me anyways. I could just lie. Yeah. So he was talking specifically about DACA in his little speech, and I had to raise my hand like, you're lying. He said it was a free program, said it was an immigration status, like it adjusted your status, and I'm like, brother, I've been paying. What the fuck you talking about? Yeah. What are you saying right now? And then I was like, can I get deported right now? And he had to say yes, because I can. Yeah. So it's not just, we're all to a certain extent either just not taught what's happening, so we just don't know to begin with, or in this case, the professor doesn't know that someone's going to be there to check you one day, and I think that day has arrived. I think we should all, whenever someone says some dumb shit, we should check them. Hey, you're wrong, Yeah. We hear a lot like why don't you just get papers? Like, it's not easy. It's a very hard and difficult, complex process. Yeah.
Oh, you're not choosing?
Oh, where are they giving them away? Because I was line up right now.
Lazy? Yeah, that's pretty interesting. What other stereotypes, I guess, do you go through as being someone who's undocumented?
Recently, maybe Natalie might not agree with me on this, but recently it's been like the language of like, oh, you shouldn't use illegal alien, you shouldn't use this, you shouldn't use that. For a while, it's been like, oh, don't use the word wetback, that's a slur. I say it on purpose in classrooms and shit to like make them uneasy. One, you shouldn't say that. I'm like, first of all, I'm undocumented myself. One, two, I didn't come up with this damn word. Y'all did. If it makes you uneasy, you can change that. You can make me and all my people, give them some kind of status so they don't have to worry about this shit. So I use it as a tool. Like, I weaponize a little bit of, oh, you're uneasy because I'm calling, I'm saying wetback. Well, all right.
You created the term.
You did this.
It's not racist if it's my own oppressed word that you created for me.
Exactly.
It's not racist.
Exactly.
That took me a long time to learn. Like about how like certain people can't be racist towards certain things because, I guess.
Yeah, it's using it tactically too. I'm not just walking around, saying, wetback to my people, but I do use it to make some people uneasy.
Yeah.
No, and why they're uneasy about that too, with you using it in a general sense rather than it being directed at someone. Like right now you're strategically making folks feel uncomfortable, because I feel like we live in a day and age where like even people who have negative perspectives around immigration will get uneasy around certain terminologies, right? But they're not doing anything to change the systems that have produced that word.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Or like don't say it like we don't. It's kind of like when people get upset when you talk about race or racism, because it makes them feel uncomfortable about that. And I think people do need to feel uncomfortable. Yeah. I think, again, it's different when you use the term strategically and you use it than when somebody uses it as part of dominant discourse.
Yeah, or as a slur type thing.
Yeah.
I mean, you can call me undocumented all you want. Like, the nice way to say, I could still get deported. Like, that doesn't changing the language is not going to change, like, structures and the reality of what we have to live through. So,
yeah. How's the border right now? Because I feel like when Trump was president, the border was on the news every single day. Is it still a wreck? Or, like, what's going on?
It's a manufactured wreck of, like, they created a problem. I mean, they could easily just allow people to move and flow wherever they want, be with their family. Because back in the day, it was open functionally back in the day. People would come and work, and then they'd go back home. And that's how it was for a long time. And then eventually they were like, oh, well, we keep a certain amount of undocumented people in this country struggling. Like, we can weaponize and exploit them in very tactful ways. Yeah. So and then nowadays you get like the militarization of the border, where you get people that struggle so hard to get here that by the time they get here, they're, starving and, dying of dehydration and all that. And then you get camps, and that's why they come in such large groups, because it's safer that way. They can, help each other to arrive, to even get there. So, and then you see like the images of like, oh, another caravan. It was like, well, that's the only safe way to travel across entire like countries. It's in large groups, and they've created conditions where that's the way people have to come. It's in large groups that way. So, I mean, historically, less people are coming than used to come back in the day. So it's not that it's worse now. It's just that like it's more publicized. It's that it's more dangerous. It's that the media keeps like anytime there's an election cycle, it's like the caravans are back, and it's like, well, people were always coming. You guys want to focus on it at a certain time to scare some white folks. So
exactly.
It's called a border spectacle. Like they use these caravans to make it seem like there's a crisis at the border. Yeah. And it kind of blurs a lot of the violence and the day-to-day violence, because it's not just the border. It's not just camps. There's like 5 different kinds of camps. There's things called ice boxes.
Yeah, like with the kids. What was that about? Like, is that still going on a lot? Yeah. The way that they made it sound. They made it sound like it was just during the Trump era. Was that still going on? Was that before Trump and after Trump?
Yeah. I mean, they call it something nicer. They just call it like, what is it? Child, not detention anymore. Like child home facility or something like that. I forget the actual name that they're using now. But functionally, kids are still in detention. Kids are still not with their parents. They're not with their families. A lot of people that come here already have some kind of family member here. And they're like, just take me with my aunt. Just take me with my uncle. Take me with my cousin. And they're like, no, you're functionally in detention. So even if it is like, let's say it is a 5-star fancy-ass hotel, and it's not. We've seen reports of what happens sometimes in these facilities. Even if it was, they're away from their family. Like at the end of the day, these kids want to be with their community. They want to be with a bunch of strangers in detention. So it might not be as brutal or as overt or as disgusting as under the Trump administration, but functionally it's the same thing to me, honestly.
Yeah.
So.
And what about if, if they're not letting people in, what's wrong with them? Why can't you pretty much just like send them right back? Like if they're at their car, like at the border and over there, because I guess they come from all over. Obviously, they come from all over Mexico, not just one city.
Yeah.
But and there wasn't anything like catch and release or something stupid like the name wise. Is that good? Is that bad? Like, why isn't that more of a thing?
So that's the fear of like Americans don't want undocumented immigrants just running around, but it's like. These people have to play out like the legal process that exists, even though as flawed as it is. You can't just keep people in detention forever, because that's what they do with a lot of people right now, currently as it stands. And catch and release, I hate that phrase. It's just people being liberated. It's just people having their freedom to just live here in the U.S. That's all that is.
Wait, so is it catch and release in the U.S. or catch and release back in Mexico?
It's here in the U.S., but it's just getting bail. It's getting bailed out of detention. That's all that is. Just being free. So that's what that is. And then for a while under COVID, there was like a policy measure where they would just deport people like as quickly as they could. Yeah. And they used like public health as a tactic to just get rid of people as fast as they could. And as far as I know, last time I checked the numbers, like Biden has deported more people than Trump. So just based off sheer numbers, Biden is technically more stringent in terms of deportations than Trump was. So
and and I like to talk on both sides, because like in my circle at least, there's a lot of people that really blue, and they after Trump they're like just too passionate, like really like like they're ready to just fight about it. Instead of just talking and addressing the pros and cons of both parties, and
they're
like
both cons.
They're both cons. They're both frauds. Yeah,
it's pretty bad. I mean, Trump was like, how do I put this? Like scientifically engineered in some kind of lab or something, or at least his policies where like let's be as racist as we physically can be. They were very brutal. They were. Yeah. It was no holds barred. We're gonna deport anyone and everyone, and we don't give a shit. We're gonna put kids in cages. Obama did the same thing though. So, but what Trump did was, I'm gonna put immigration. About it. Yeah, exactly. We're gonna put this person named Stephen Miller in charge of immigration policy for the White House, and this person is a white supremacist. Like this person wants to deport literally every undocumented immigrant you can, and every person that has gained status since then. I mean, at one point they floated like the idea out there in the news of like revoking people's citizenship of people that were born here, so functionally citizens. Once you're born here, you become you're a citizen. But if their parents weren't documented, those children get their citizenship revoked. Like that was floated at one point. Yeah, like that's a constitutional amendment that happened like after the Civil War, where African Americans who were born here, they were like, oh well, are they citizens? Or are they not? So they put it in an amendment, like if you're born here, you're a citizen. End of story.
Yeah.
So they were talking about like, reworking an amendment just to take away citizenship from immigrants. So
and then there would be people who would have no citizenship, because not everywhere does citizenship just pass. Like if you were born to a single mom in some countries, that wouldn't mean you would get citizenship. From that, so if the U.S. was revoking folks' citizenship, for some people they would be left with no citizenship. So it also touched on international law, and I think that was a question I had, because a lot of folks who are coming to the border, they can't just turn them away because of international law. Like seeking asylum is legal.
Yeah.
So they're creating all of these mechanisms to be able to say no or to turn them away. That isn't like, oh, we're not taking asylum seekers or refugees. Because presenting yourself at the border, which is what many of the caravans are doing, is like sanctioned by international law.
Yeah.
So they can get in?
Like, yeah, if you are a refugee and you show yourself at the border and say, I'm here to seek asylum, they have to take your case technically. But that's where, what did you say it was called? The camps that are now on the other side of the border?
Oh, it's under the MPP program. So they're down in Mexico.
Yeah, the MPP program, these ICE boxes, the detention centers these are all ways of making it even more difficult. So people who did present themselves, who quote and unquote went about it the legal and the right way, are still being turned. And that process itself is not easy. So to say you're an asylum seeker, you have to prove that your life is under threat in very specific ways. A lot of folks don't have the language for that, don't know. Like, gang violence falls weirdly when it comes to asylum seekers. Like you have to word that very specifically for it to count. And so that's why a lot of people who, like, under international law should be given asylum are turned away. And there's the case of Roxana Hernandez. She was a trans woman who had tried to come to the United States 3 times. All those 3 times by presenting herself at the border saying she was seeking asylum. Every time she was turned away. And, she was a trans woman. She was leaving like one of the most dangerous places for trans people. And a lot of it was like she left because of a sexual assault, because of violence. There was no protection there. And still then, that did not, quote and unquote, count as asylum. And when she was detained, you're detained in these, places where you're not given medical care, where you're abused, and there's other violences that happen. So a lot of folks are leaving dangerous situations that the U.S. was kind of involved in. And, that's kind of where I wanted to go. Like when we were, Juan, maybe you can touch on this, is, like the border starts from where they left. They're already kind of like these violences start. And I think when you went down to the border, was there any discussion of that? Do you feel even lawyers who have good intentions of helping out, they kind of lose sight of, these global inequalities or histories and legacies of violence that the U.S. and colonialism was largely involved in?
Yeah, I mean, we forget that to this day, America still gets involved in Latin American, not just Latin America, but all over the world. I mean, there was a Venezuelan coup attempt not too long ago. There was the Bolivian coup that actually went all the way through. And Evo Morales, president of Bolivia at the time, and he won again, so he's currently president. He had to flee to Mexico. He had to take like pretty much asylum, refuge in Mexico. That's the president of a nation in which the U.S. was not maybe directly involved, but it's been reported that they were like indirectly involved in that coup attempt.
Yeah.
So I mean, they've created conditions in all these countries where things are dire for some people, all in the sake of like private companies to be able to continue to extract resources and extract labor from these countries. And so sometimes people want to flee that. Shocking, right? They're like, oh, it sucks here. I want to leave. So they come here where...
Yeah, and like the reason why we have bananas is because we did some type of entire coup somewhere.
The United Fruit Company.
Yeah, something like that.
Yeah, I mean that's where you get the term banana republic. It's because there was a. Do you want to go into specifics or
You start because
I forget which country was it? Nicaragua.
Nicaragua. Yeah,
One of the
and,
countries in
Jamaica
it's
too.
called the Northern Triangle. So right under Mexico, they have fertile grounds to grow tropical fruits, bananas. United Fruit Company had a lot of land holdings there, and they used to grow bananas there. And there was the threat of people organizing and coming to power that might take away those private lands and use them for something else, or just use the banana or what's grown there to sell in order to raise funds for their own people and use it for like public services, for education, healthcare, that kind of stuff. But that obviously would affect United Fruit Company's profits.
Yeah.
And so it wasn't that, they told the U.S., hey, go do this now, although there's like, discussion as to whether that's exactly what happened. It was that the U.S. realizing what would happen, orchestrated and instituted a government that would be friendly to private interests, to American companies, to the United Fruit Company. So it was a banana republic. And they've done that all over the place since then, and they'll keep doing it.
And even with the World Bank, too, like a lot of countries have borrowed money. Yeah. So like Jamaica's a good case where they borrowed money and then they're locked into working with these corporations, to working with the World Bank, where they couldn't afford bananas there. But they had to grow and sell so many out. They get kind of stuck in these situations. And when I teach, I like to use eating a banana as one of the most social and violent things you can do with your day. Because think about how, like, bananas don't grow in Michigan, obviously. How many hands have touched that? Yeah. That's a whole roadmap, right, of economic exploitation, from the farm to getting it here, to even how it was introduced there, like... because when you buy bananas in Egypt, they're still on the tree. Really? Yeah, like you see the whole head of the tree there.
Yeah, I'm borrowing from a scholar, Michael Parenti. Maybe he borrowed from someone else, I don't know. But when I heard him in something I saw on a video of him, where he said it's not that these countries are themselves poor, they're rich. They're not underdeveloped, they're overexploited. There's plenty of resources, they're just extracted to the benefit of private companies, not just American, by the way. It's a bunch of different companies from all over, quote unquote, the Western world, right? Europe.
So China's really good at making those deals. Like they're gonna take the biggest Turkish port.
Yeah, and it's because these places, they have a lot of resources, to go around. Not just people themselves, labor itself, but also like just mineral resources, land, water, all that stuff, and it's been extracted, And these countries that are today, for example, the U.S., very rich, at least, the ones who have the wealth. Yeah. It's a part of it was on the backs of some of these countries in Latin America, in Asia, in Africa. And I think it's ironic when America, for example, tries to say, okay, we've taken your resources, we've, started wars in some of these nations, we've devastated your ecosystem, but now that you want to come here, nah, you can't come here. Come on, you gotta, you don't fit the roadmap. You can't fit these requirements. So unfortunately, you can't come here. So that's going back to immigration. At least that's why I find it like, who are you to tell these people you can't come here? Right?
Yeah, no, I agree 100%.
In that sense, it sounds very much like it's a system of impunity. Impunity means they're not held accountable for their actions. They can do violences and wreak havoc without anything coming back. So, there was impunity in the extraction and exploitation of those countries. There's an impunity in the accountability in terms of people who come here. And then again, at the violence at the borders that occur. When we had recently the border enforcement zone, recently passed. I don't know if you remember on Instagram, there was a picture of like the U.S. with this like red big line around it. So the Supreme Court supposedly passed this new border enforcement zone that says 100 miles from the border, ICE has the impunity or can do keza, right? Well, that's been around. The border enforcement zone has been around since the Immigration Act, like in the 50s. It's been around far longer than ICE. And all of the like impunity or whatever they allowed ICE in this new proceeding, ICE has already been doing that. All that was done was it was written in law that it is okay for it to happen. Yeah. But the Supreme Court has ruled against people who had their rights violated by ICE within that zone based on this like fact of impunity. So I think just to bring it back to kind of law, like if these violences are happening, you know, in banana republics, and then folks are facing the violences again here, how do you use law when even the Supreme Court was, oh no, your Fourth Amendment right does not matter, you know, in this case, because we're upholding impunity.
Yeah, I mean, and to that ruling, to that point, that case was dealing with a U.S. citizen, by the way. So they're doing this to not just like immigrants; they're doing this to American citizens, right? Yeah. There was a case, and I forget the name. I think it's Hernandez v. the U.S. or something like that. But point is, they killed an American citizen who they thought was, you know, undocumented, and I don't know what they thought they were doing, but he was on his own land, and they killed this person, and they got away with it. So this isn't just violence that is enacted on immigrants; it's enacted on all of us, you know. Yeah. And they got the cover of the state pretty much. They have like, you know, a blank check to do as they please, as long as they justify it under, oh, it's national security threat. Oh, we're enforcing immigration policy, so we have to go in and search through your home. What if you're hiding somebody?
Yeah. I think Americans need to realize we're the testing grounds for imperial, like the border
for the rest of the world.
Yeah,
whatever they can do to us, the rest of any other powerful government is gonna try to do.
And
you know, so they're like, they can get away with it in America, we can definitely get away with it over here.
And even the U.S. government, though, like they're sharpening their weapons to use in wars here. You know, the border is seen as called the playground of imperialism. Yeah. A lot of stuff that they're drones, a lot of these technologies that they're using as part of imperialism, you know, in other places, they're perfecting at the border. They're perfecting with prisons. They're perfecting with, like, you know, your Fourth Amendment right doesn't matter your status if it's under these means.
Yeah. I saw a video this past week. It's regarding to like drones and all that. Y'all seen the little dog, little cybernetic dog? They like attached a gun to that. So imagine that like just patrolling the border. Yeah, the little drone dog.
The drones are gonna be weaponized for sure.
That's terrifying.
The amount of stock that's in. Well, they were originally created to be weaponized, like the big white one that you always see like in the military movies. But that was like a huge plane, but it was a drone technically. Yeah. And now they're gonna be the size of this with guns.
Yeah.
That's crazy. But it's about 3:00. I have another meeting to get to. But I do appreciate you coming on here and talking to me and stuff. Hopefully a year from now after you graduate, you know, we can come back.
For sure. Thank you for having me.
See how it's going on. But I learned a lot for sure. And hopefully my listeners, you know, they learn a lot from this too. So I appreciate you asking answering my questions. I know some of them are ignorant questions. It's like, why doesn't every American know this type of shit? You know? Yeah.
That's why we have to ask them.
Yeah, I mean, I didn't know at one point, so it's fine.
Yeah. So I appreciate it.
Happy to learn, happy to teach. So.
Right. So, all right, everybody. Peace and love.